Captain James was a seasoned pilot, known for his calm demeanor and expertise in the cockpit. He had a witty sense of humor, and often kept guests on the flight in good spirits with funny puns and silly jokes. He was confident in his abilities, having served in the Air Force. Flying was his passion, and he was determined to do his best to keep his passengers and his professional reputation in mint condition. It began with a faint whisper that James heard while performing pre-flight checks late at night. "Captain James, you will crash," it said. He looked around, but the cockpit was empty. He tried to ignore it, but the voice persisted, growing louder each night. James began to feel a cold presence in the cockpit, especially near the controls. The whispers continued, suggesting that his flights were doomed. "You will kill them all," they taunted. James became obsessed with ensuring the safety of his flights, spending hours double-checking everything. He started seeing ghostly figures in the cockpit, their faces filled with accusation and pain. The whispers grew louder, haunting him every day. Years ago, James had been involved in a plane crash where he was the sole survivor. The memory of that tragedy had always haunted him, but now it seemed to blend with his current fears, making him question his abilities and his sanity. James had always wondered why he survived while everyone else perished. It never felt fair. He would never forget that day. Desperate, James confided in his colleagues and even talked to a therapist 3 times per week in an effort to get back to what really felt like himself again. But no one seemed to believe him about the ghost especially. He could tell that when he talked about it, people were just nodding along, as if to be understanding and kind while not believing a word of it. This really bothered James, as he had a pretty sharp wit about him and he prided himself on his sound and logical decisions. They suggested he was just under stress and needed a break. His family worried about his state of mind, urging him to take some time off. But this just perturbed James even more. Now he was determined to stay dedicated to his schedule. He would not allow these occurrences to hinder his plans. In the military, you did your job, rain or shine, and James was not willing to give up. The whispers became more insistent. "You cannot escape your guilt, James. You selfishly saved yourself while leaving all the others to die. You will pay for your deeds," they cried. James started seeing the ghostly figures more frequently, their spectral forms following him in close proximity, whispering and taunting all along. The cold presence became unbearable, chilling him to the bone. His performance began to suffer. He became paranoid and jumpy, seeing ghostly figures in the shadows. He began to forget very basic safety routines and found himself preoccupied with his dark past and not focusing on the safety of his passengers. He was even grouchy with some of the crew and had to apologize twice last week for an outburst. He was not himself. He couldn't tell what was real and what was a figment of his tortured mind. He started doubting his sanity, wondering if he was truly losing his grip on reality. One night as he was alone in the cockpit, the whispers became a roar. "Join us, Captain James," they demanded. He saw the ghost of a passenger from the crash, their face twisted in pain and sorrow. James screamed and temporarily lost control of his thought process, panicking mid-flight. One of the flight crew rushed in to check on him, but he quickly dismissed his outburst as nothing serious in an effort to smooth things over. But it didn't last long. The voices came back in a fury. James burst out of the cockpit, desperate to escape the voice and the ghosts. Quickly woke his co-pilot, having a quick nap in the rear quarters, and gave almost no explanation before he ducked into his own tight quarters and crawled into the bunk, tears streaming down his face. He locked himself in and fell to his knees, begging for it to stop. He could not take this any longer. The faces of the lost crew, the voices, the ghosts. It was all too much to bear. Just as he was about to give in to despair, his bunk quarters filled with a blinding light. The whispers turned into a furious hiss. "You cannot escape us!" they roared. James experienced what felt like turbulence, but it was much more robust. Booming wind noise and screeching accusations from the voices as the ghosts swarmed his quarters relentlessly. He tried not to scream, as he knew it would be heard by the crew and possibly some passengers. He remembered his military training and began taking deep breaths, talking himself down and reciting the custom protocol for emergencies mid-flight. Quickly, things began to settle down again as he focused on this breathing. In less than a minute, his bunk was quiet again, with only the sounds of the humming engines in the background. James was still overwhelmed, but it felt like he had been on a battlefield for the past hour, with no explanation as to what had really happened. He realized that his airline had a dark history, with several unexplained pilots and crew members resigning from their positions with notably no reasonable explanation, and the history went back years. Could this have been related to the same ghosts on his plane? Had they been haunting the pilots and crew for the last 20 years? James confided in some of the more tenured crew members and career pilots, and discovered that at least 2 of them were willing to admit similar occurrences over their tenure with the airline. He wasn't alone in his fear. There was something evil lurking in the cockpit, something that fed on the fear and suffering of its occupants. James decided to gather other pilots who had experienced similar torment. They found strength in each other's stories and began to uncover the truth behind the whispers and the ghosts. Together, they would fight back by staying in touch, speaking aloud to the voices and ghosts to let them know they were no longer isolated. They would not give up. And you, dear listener, have you ever heard whispers in the silence of the dark? Have you ever felt a cold presence that chills you to the bone? You're not alone in your fear. There's something out there, something evil that delights in tormenting the innocent. Don't let it win. Find others who believe you. Together, you can fight the darkness. If you enjoyed this story, please subscribe and follow us for more. Join us on TikTok and YouTube for more Chilling Chronicles, if you dare.